In this video, you're going to learn about all the new patch 14.1 meta trends that we expect to emerge, along with a complete update on the solo queue tier list for every single role. With all the new item and map changes for Season 14, the first few weeks of the patch are going to be extremely hectic with new builds constantly popping up, so champions will be flip-flopping all over the place in the tier list for a while. You don't have to worry at all about being lost though, as we'll be releasing a ton of meta content to keep you guys in the loop, so make sure you're subscribed. So with the help of our challenger players, spending a bunch of time on the PvE testing champions and builds, we're set to bring you guys our very first tier list of the new season. But before we get into it, be sure to check out SkillCapped if you want to truly get better at League of Legends. We're the only service that offers a money-back guarantee if you don't climb at least 5 divisions while actively using our service. We do this because our service really does work, and if it doesn't work for you, you shouldn't pay. Learn more at the end of this video or click the link in the description below. Starting it off up in the top lane, the role may legitimately turn into an island for Season 14. With the map changes, it's now much more difficult for junglers to gank top lane. This indirectly makes champions that thrive in the early game and are exceptional duelists that much more attractive. If the meta becomes set in stone so that pathing towards top lane is just not optimal, playing champions that can dominate the 1v1 will be really good. We expect picks like Olaf, Uxin, Vayne, Quinn, and Varus to be great to start off Season 14, and we have them all in our A tier or above. Now, one thing that could make Vayne and Varus even higher priority top lane picks is if tanks really make a push back into meta. There are so many new tank items being released for Season 14, and there's also much less tank shredding items in the game. Divine Sunderer is removed and Demonic Embrace is gone as well, so the general ability to shred tanks is not as high as before. Varus top is an exceptionally strong pick into tanks due to his % health damage, so keep an eye out for him if tanks end up popping up a ton. Rumble finally has his Liandry's back as a rush item, which will feel really nice and provide him with an excellent one-item spike. We are a bit worried about viability of AP top laners though, just because the new tank item Kaenic Rookern is such an OP counter. Kaenic Rookern offers 80 magic resist and also gives you a ludicrous magic shield, so blind picking AP tops just won't feel very good to start off Season 14. So if we have a look at how the complete top lane tier list is shaping out, we have Ornn, Fiora, and Trundle leading the way in the OP tier. Trundle should remain a very strong pick to start Season 14 because his dueling strength will be even more valuable with top lane being harder to gank, while his tank shredding capabilities will suit him extremely well if tanks do make a big push back into meta. There's a similar thought process behind Fiora's placement, as she loves being isolated in the 1v1 and her kit allows her to deal with tanks extremely well. Ornn will be able to take full advantage of the new tank item Kaenic Rookern, while his ability to go toe-to-toe with a lot of fighters in the 1v1 is actually quite good compared to a lot of other tanks. Really be careful with blind picking AP tops to start Season 14. Kaenic Rookern is just such a hard counter, and if the enemy locks in a tank, it's going to be very difficult for you to amass any sort of advantage in lane. We don't have a single AP champion in the S tier to start off Season 14 to reflect this outlook. On the flip side of this, you really should have a tank in your champion pool to hard counter AP comps. Mage items are being reworked, so there are going to be a lot of AP champs spammed in the mid lane to start Season 14. A lot of players will want to experiment with mage items in the jungle as well, so if the enemy team locks a comp with 2 or more magic damage threats, you can really hard counter them with the new magic resist items. Tanks may not be these super OP blind picks, but it's pretty safe to say they'll be insanely powerful counter picks. You're going to notice that the S tier for top lane is primarily built around champions who have exceptional dueling capabilities. Olaf, Riven, Pantheon, Quinn, Warwick, Uxin, the list goes on and on. These champs that can really take advantage of the more isolated state of top lane will become much stronger for this season. Now, the changes to the map up in top lane should actually have a pretty significant effect on how the jungle role is played as a whole. It's now just flat out harder to gank both top and mid lane. In Season 13, if you were on blue side, you'd be able to loop around and gank the enemy from the tri-brush, but that gank angle is no longer possible. The enemy top laner could be positioned in the middle of the lane, but now that you can't get in behind them, pulling off successful ganks will be a much more difficult feat. It's always been a great strategy for mid laners to ward one side of the map and then hug that side of the lane, and with mid lane now becoming wider, this strategy will make it almost impossible for a lot of junglers to gank. So this then leaves us with bot lane, which is actually becoming easier for junglers to gank due to the flank routes on both sides of the map. League is all about percentages, and especially as a jungler, you have to always be thinking about whether or not a gank is worth it. So much of the time now, ganking top or mid just won't be a high percentage play, which leaves us with either highly prioritizing bot lane or just not ganking at all. These junglers who either spike at level 6 or just prefer to full clear their jungle should have the edge up to start Season 14. Lethality junglers are ones to watch out for this season, because lethality on items is now being changed from scaling to a flat amount. In Season 13, when you'd buy a lethality item that had 18 18 lethality, you wouldn't actually gain that 18 lethality right away. It was really weird. The lethality would scale with your level, giving you 11 lethality at level 1 and then 18 lethality at level 18. Now in Season 14, you're just getting that 18 lethality as soon as you pick up your item, which will make snowballing on AD assassins much easier. For the jungle tier list, the OP tier will be locked down by 3 champions, as we have Kha'Zix, Fiddlesticks, and Nocturne. Nocturne and Fiddle are 2 champions we are quite high on for Season 14 because they fit into the mold of the new map very well. Neither champion really wants to spam gank early on, so the fact ganking has become more difficult doesn't really affect them. At level 6 though, this is where both champions can really excel compared to most junglers, as they actually have gank threat in every single lane. Fiddle with his R will be able to gank top lane very well, and Nocturne can gank any lane he wants due to his semi-global R. From testing on the PvE, Fiddle also seems super nuts with the new item Malignance, which provides ability haste for your ultimate and also gives you bonus damage when your R is running. As for Kha'Zix, the new lethality item Voltaic Cyclo Sword synergizes super well with him, and he's also able to rush Tiamat now to help with his clear due to the item being a component to the new lethality item Profane Hydra. As we mentioned previously, lethality is now flat and no longer scales, which means the early game power spike from purchasing lethality items will enable AD assassin junglers to snowball even harder than before. It's not just Kha'Zix to watch out for though, as Rengar, Briar, Graves, and Talon can take advantage of the lethality buffs and are all placed in the S tier. Junglers like Lee Sin and Xin Zhao, who are more early game reliant and also don't have a tool at level 6 that makes gank access any easier, are going to have a much harder time finding success. You'll notice that the general trend for the jungle tier list in 14.1 is that farming or scaling junglers are higher up the list, while ganking or more early game reliant junglers are lower down. There will be a lot of new strategies that emerge for the mid lane in 14.1, so let's break it down. Lethality mid lane champions, being Talon, Zed, Qiyana, and Naafiri, are all going to become stronger. Not only is lethality stronger early on now, since you get a flat amount instead of scaling, but the new item Profane Hydra is going to make the shove and roam of these champions that much more insane. Naafiri and Zed liked building Ravenous Hydra in Season 13, however, the item was never built for assassins as it did not have any lethality. The fact Profane Hydra now builds out of Tiamat and has lethality will make it the perfect pickup for all AD assassin mids. With the new tank item Kanik Rookern providing a ludicrous amount of defensive strength against AP comps, watch out for Galio, Cassante, and mid lane tanks in general. We have both Galio and Cassante in the S tier right now, but it's hard to say which other tanks will truly shine until we have a few days to play the patch on live servers. Since Liandry's is no longer a viable rush item anymore on the majority of mages, and Divine Sunderer is no longer in the game, the one item spike for tanks that are stacking health will be more powerful in a lot of games. Now, of course, the mage items are seeing a massive overhaul, and the main takeaway from all the changes is that burst is up, but survivability is down. Shadow Flame no longer offers any health, while Storm Surge, which is the new AP burst item, offers no health either. Health is also gone on Horizon Focus, so for a lot of mages, you won't actually be gaining any added health from your 2 core items anymore. Champions that can sit back at a very safe range like Lux, Vel'Koz, and Xerath should really like the direction of these changes. With mid lane being much wider now, it's also going to be nearly impossible to gank these longer ranged mages, so they should be winning out big. Mages who can reliably burst really hard to take advantage of Storm Surge should be loving the new season as well, with picks like LeBlanc, Annie, Lissandra, and Twisted Fate as ones to watch. So with our general expectations for mid lane covered, let's have a look at the tier list. For the OP tier, Talon, Fizz, and Naafiri rise above all else. Talon and Naafiri, being 2 champions who can take advantage of Profane Hydra, along with lethality being stronger, will make their shove and roam playstyle even more effective. Fizz is actually seeing even more one-shot power added to his core build for Season 14, as the AP on Zanya's is going up from 80 to 120. With both stopwatch and perfect timing removed for Season 14, the only way you could actually get the stasis effect is if you build Seeker's Armguard or Zanya's. This alone will bode extremely well for Zed, as he had a very difficult time succeeding when games would drag out, and everyone would just stash a stopwatch in their back pocket. We've had Zed down in the mid lane B tier for the past while, but he's now moving up into A, and could very well deserve a push into S if everything pans out accordingly. All assassin champions in general should be buffed for Season 14, because mages will now be the only core class of champions that have access to the stasis. Mages also having less access to health will make them more one-shottable for assassins. One champion we see having a more difficult time fitting into the Season 14 landscape is Sylas. Everfrost and Night Harvester are both removed now, and other than Rod of Ages, no mage item has health and mana. Rod is probably the go-to rush for Sylas now, but this just means his early game skirmish becomes a bit stunted as he gets no ability haste from the item. Night Harvester and Everfrost were just such nice items for Sylas due to them having health health, AP, and ability haste, but now Rocket Belt is the only option if you want all 3 of those stats. Of course, we could be wrong here, and there's a super OP build we're just not thinking about, but Sylas is one mid lane champ we think is nerfed for Season 14. A bit of a sleeper pick we expect to be really strong in the mid lane is Cassante. He was pulled out quite often by pro players in Season 13 as a mid laner, and with Kana Grookern being a potential rush item on Cassante, he can really look to nullify heavy AP comps. So, as we've noted earlier on in the video, with lethality now being flat and no longer scaling, the reward for purchasing early lethality will be much greater, which means lethality ADCs should be much higher priority. Of course, there are only a few ADCs who can actually build lethality, but we do expect for those who can to really set themselves apart from the rest of the pack. Now, there is a new on-hit item being introduced called Terminus, and from testing on the PvE, it's looking like more of a later game pickup than a first or second item staple. The item deals less damage than something like Blade of the Ruined King early on, so we don't expect this new addition to have a massive effect on the strength of on-hit ADCs. Important to note as well, which will affect a bunch of ADCs, is that Trinity Force no longer has its threefold strike passive where it would grant stacking bonus AD. This will make Trinity Force much less enticing on champions like Draven, Vayne, and Ashe. Draven can swap to lethality, so he should be fine. However, Trinity was just so good on Vayne and Ashe that we think their overall power levels will drop due to this change. The map changes should have a pretty big effect on how the bot lane meta shapes out as well. Bot is without question going to be the easiest lane for junglers to gank, so it's going to get even more hectic down there. With even more action likely to occur in the bot lane early on, these ADCs who can skirmish very well should have a nice edge up. Think Draven, Lucian, Samira, and Tristana. More of a niche pick here, but a mage like Karthus who can provide a ton of extended fight strength should fit really well into the meta if you like those sleeper picks. So with all those thoughts covered, here's how the ADC tier list will reflect them. OP tier is going to consist of Draven, Misfortune, and Samira. All 3 champions can abuse the early game buffs to lethality. Samira is just straight up buffed for Season 14 due to lethality being changed from scaling to flat. Samira players rushed the Collector towards the end of Season 13, and that strategy will be even more insane now. Although less Draven players liked rushing the Collector, we expect for it to catch on and become more meta on him as well. Misfortune is one ADC who is actually already building full-out lethality in Season 13, so she's in an even better spot now. One other champion who's not in the OP tier, but right below in S tier that you should be looking to rush the Collector on is Nilah. ADCs who have less reliable early skirmish power like Sivir, Kai'Sa, and Aphelios are lower down the tier list to start Season 14. With the change to Trinity Force, Ezreal will be an interesting one to track as well. We expect for his overall power level to be a bit weaker than where it was in Season 13, so we have moved him from S and into A tier. The support role is a lot more difficult to predict as to how the meta will shape out. Reason for this is because there's now just one starting item for all supports. However, once you collect enough gold with your support item, you then get to choose from one of 5 upgrades. If one of these upgrades just ends up being way more powerful than the rest, it could solely dictate how the support meta shapes out. Check out our itemization guide if you want a more in-depth breakdown of these new upgrades. Now, supports in general should have greater agency and become more powerful as a whole for Season 14 because these new upgrades will add a bunch of strength to them for such a cheap cost. Items aside, the map changes do lead us to believing that your stronger skirmishing supports will rise above. With the focus being around bot lane, we just can't see how picking a scaling enchanter like Sona or Yuumi will be high priority. On the flip side, these supports with instant catch power like Maokai, Thresh, and Blitzcrank are who we are quite high on. There's a new support item called Trailblazer, which is basically the support version of Deadman's Plate. This should bode really well for Maokai and other melee supports that like to roam a lot. If we dive into the support tier list, topping the OP tier will be Maokai, Blitzcrank, and Senna. The new Bloodsong support upgrade combined with lethality being more powerful early on should only make Senna even more devastating in Season 14. Maokai and Blitzcrank are 2 champions we see being really great abusers of the new Trailblazer item, and combined with their strong skirmishes will make them great for the more bot lane centric focus early on in the game. Zyra is one champion in specific we see losing power for Season 14. Liandry's is no longer a rushable item as it provides no mana or haste, so Zyra's just losing her optimal rush option from Season 13. Same thing goes for Brand. Liandry's is just not rushable anymore, which means you won't be able to hit that really nice 2-item spike of Liandry's and Rylai's on these champions. The general trend we see coming to fruition to start Season 14 is that champs like Nautilus, Braum, and Rel, who can do really well in those 3v3 fights, will be of higher value than enchanters like Sona, Yuumi, or Seraphine that need to scale more to reach their maximum effectiveness. Alright guys, before we wrap this up, let's tell you a little more about SkillCapped. So, we offer a 5-division rank up guarantee and think that's a pretty crazy thing to offer. It's like a gym membership guaranteeing you'll get ripped. Your local gym would go bust if they offered that, right? Not us. We've offered this for years because our service really does work. It works so well, in fact, that we're able to produce by far the largest catalog of premium league guides on the internet. We add over 20 videos a week with over 1,600 guides curated into over 100 courses no one can compare. We've also sent Challenger players into ELO Hell 714 times and counting, where they commentate how to carry live. They also respond to all questions asked. Sign up today for as little as $6.99 a month if you are serious about improving. So that's going to wrap everything up for our very first tier list of Season 14. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and we'll see you back soon.